Welcome to Learn Jazz Bass with Matt Rybicki. I'm glad that you're here. As you can see, I've got a different instrument in my hands today, the good old Porkchop, as it's sometimes called. We're talking about playing jazz on electric bass today. I know that many of you are electric players, and so you certainly know something about this, but I thought it might be helpful to gather some ideas for trying to mimic the traditional sound, not just the timbre, but the actual sort of ways of playing traditionally in the jazz context, where acoustic bass was obviously the only instrument until like the mid to late 60s. So if you want to do all the flashy things that electric can do that upright can't, well, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about trying to mimic that traditional way of playing. And as you know, there isn't, or hopefully you know, that there isn't really any difference in the content or information when you are playing either instrument. The note choices are the same, the approach is the same, the harmony is the same, everything's the same. But there are some things to consider that have to do with how we approach some settings and some technique and some sort of concepts on electric. Let's talk about those concepts now that don't have to do with settings or technique necessarily. The first thing I wanted to let you know is that in general, we're talking about making choices that have to do with the obstacles, the physical obstacles of the upright. Because it's harder to press the strings down, harder to get the notes started, harder to move around than electric, there are some things that traditional players would generally play that are not what we might default to on electric, especially if we're coming from having played electric our whole lives. For example, there are generally less kind of notes played in the upright walking line than can be in the electric line. You may have even heard me do this today. It's hard not to do, to play like a lot of extra skips and stuff like that. The effort on the upright is more than the electric, and so there is an economy of note choice. Also, there is the consideration of the physical sound of the upright leads to having notes that decay faster than electric. What I mean is the end of the note after you strike it. So if I play a C, there's a beginning, the strike, that first part, and then how long the note lasts is its decay, or how long its decay is. On electric, that's generally much longer than on upright. There's things we can do about that, let's talk about, but that we will talk about. But considering that these notes are generally shorter and there are generally less of them, can help sort of steer your ear in the right direction where you want to go when you're playing. Additionally, I want to have you think about the actual sort of default fingering on the upright versus the electric. Generally, we're taught on electric 1, 2, 3, 4. First finger, second finger, third finger, fourth finger. 1 per fret. But on the upright, in case you didn't know, we only use 3 fingers until we get to thumb position in the really traditional way of fingering. So rather than 1, 2, 3, 4, we're playing first finger, second finger, and then fourth finger. And the ring finger sort of sits there with it. So 1, 2, and then 2, 3, and 4 together. What this does when you consider it and come from this place, when you're making improvising walking line choices, is that the way you shift, what you shift or don't, the open strings that you use, and so on, will be different than if you finger an electric style. Let's play a C natural minor in the traditional electric fingering. So 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1, 3. But on upright, we would usually start on our pinky on the C and use open strings. C, open D, E flat, F, open G, A flat, and then we got to shift B flat to C. Besides the timbre difference of, which is pretty subtle right there, besides that timbre difference, the notes are the same, but when you are improvising a walking line, you're more prone to make a decision than an upright player would make because of the limitations. So you're giving yourself some guardrails, some guidelines to really sort of hem yourself in a way to mimic those kinds of note choices. And remember I said that we're going to choose open strings more often. That has to do with the economy of motion on the upright as well. It's easier to play an open string than to actually fret it. And so thinking about that when we're choosing our lines is going to also lead us to make decisions that are a little bit more upright-like. That's also mirrored in choices of like the ornamentation that we do, like triplet drops and skips and ghosted notes and so on. Lots of ghosted notes are open strings, open D, open G, even if it's not in the key, it's just a percussive sound that one is playing that we wouldn't necessarily do on electric. And for example, if we're going to do a triplet drop on the upright, something like a B flat chord, we might play B flat, open G, open D, open B flat. That's one choice. And you might even pull that off, pull the B flat to G off. That's fine, and you can certainly do that on electric, but electric, if you're not thinking from the upright perspective, you might have your B flat here in the middle of the neck, right? And you might just go, oh, I'm gonna do a triplet here, and you might sort of choose like B flat to C, to B flat to G or something, or to E flat or to F, or something like that. Some unnatural sort of fingering that is very awkward on the upright. So considering that will allow you to sound a little bit more, again, authentic. Not that there's a right and wrong, but this is just about mimicking that sort of traditional sound. You also, as far as the general approach and the decay of the note, you want to be able to also get the note started in an effective way. You want to hear the beginning of the note, as that is something that is often also very prominent on upright and can be buried on electric. If I play very high on the neck, very far away from the pickup, and I play that C minor scale, it's got a potentially pretty sound to your ears, but the notes are very much bled together. They're very much like liquids mixed up. We need some definition in between each note to give a sense of the time itself. The quarter note itself, the beginning of the quarter note, helps us to establish what the overall time feel is. So we need to have a little bit of aggression when we are playing upright. When we're playing electric. I don't mean to imply that you need to slap and pop like crazy, but rather it requires just a little bit more strength, a little bit more intensity to get the beginning of that note. Hopefully you hear that beginning a little bit more. So effectively, the only real difference, as I said, is the sound itself, the actual timbre of the instrument. And there's a lot of ideas from a lot of people online about how you might go about doing that. For me personally, I find that it's much more about the general concept, about how I'm approaching it, that makes it successful, because I have a very clearly defined sense of swing and what the sort of conceptually what it's supposed to be. It comes out kind of no matter the timbre of the instrument. When you're thinking about changing the actual sound of your bass, there's lots of things to take into account. But one thing first, I think, is to get a sense of sort of who you are trying to sound like. Okay, you want to sound like Upright, but are you trying to sound like Gary Peacock, which is a very definitive, particular kind of sound, or like a Brian Bromberg sound? Or are you trying to sound like Paul Chambers or Wilbur Ware or Red Mitchell or something like that? Those are very different timbre sort of profiles. When we're talking about the characteristics of the timbre of sound in general with bass, we're generally talking about a few different characteristics like thump or hump, and then a sort of meow or moi sound. You can also talk about sort of the harmonic richness, the overtones, and this sort of organic quality of it. And then also, you know, are you going to play with a bow or not? Obviously, we can't do that here. So if you want to get sort of like more of that thump in your sound, or that hump in the sound, we might affect technique and sort of putting something under or near your bridge, which we'll talk about in a second. If you want to talk about getting that moi or that meowing sound, that growly sound, that has to do more with sort of trying to get in the realm of a fretless bass. So those kinds of things are taken into consideration when you want to decide what you want to sound like. So speaking about this sort of gear related things, you can choose a fretless bass. That certainly will get you in sort of one direction. You could also choose obviously an acoustic upright if you want a completely different thing, or sometimes called a silent bass. I don't have really any experience with those. And then there's also something called a Kala U bass, which I'll put a little video here so that you can hear what this thing sounds like, which is kind of uprighty, surprisingly. Check it out. So you could change your gear, you could change your instrument itself, you can pull the actual frets out of a fingerboard. Google doing that if you want to try to go down that route. You could also just change your neck to a fretless neck. Nonetheless, so there's that kind of major change that you can think about. But there's also gear that is accessories like strings, obviously. And a great suggestion is to use flat wounds or tape wound strings, which I don't have here. These are round wounds, but those are going to oftentimes, according to lots of people, get you the closest to an upright sound because of the actual overtones of the string themselves. So flat wounds seem to be the general winner for lots of people. I know people like tape wounds too. So on the instrument itself, whatever the instrument is, you do want to consider the actual setup of the bass as far as if you're really dedicated to having this traditional sound. And remember I mentioned earlier, I believe, that there is a natural resonance to this electric instrument, that you can actually get the wood to move, but it requires effort on our part. I'm not talking about beating it with a hammer, but if you raise the strings, if you allow for the proper relief in the neck for the strings to move freely, you can actually get more of a sort of punchy, bigger sound essentially when you raise the strings, play a little harder. I had some problems when I talked about not playing with an amplifier with the upright bass and raising strings and so on and so forth. Don't hurt yourself. I'm not saying that. I just mean give it a little bit more on that side as opposed to trying to get them as close to the fingerboard as possible. That's not going to really give you the air in the sound or that definition between notes. That's one particular setting to think about. So how the relief of the neck, how it's bowed or not, and then also how high the strings are. You can also, of course, change or think about the pickups on the bass. On this Sadowski right here, this is really just like, it's a gospel R&B Broadway bass. Like Lots of Broadway players have these. It's a very definitive sound for this particular thing. Their preamps are great. They're very bass heavy. There's not a lot of mids in them. But of course, if you change the pickup type, or if you're using a Fender P bass, that's going to be a very different sound because of the pickups. So also thinking about the settings on the instrument itself related to the pickups will make a difference. I myself, on this particular bass, I've got the bridge pickup all the way selected, as opposed to the neck pickup. And then also on this bass, I know not a lot of basses have this, but this is an active bass. I can toggle one of the knobs here and pull it up to make it a passive bass. But it's too, for me, it's too dead in this particular setup because I also have a mute under the strings where this is passive. Back to the active. Just my personal preference, but thinking about those kinds of things, and if you've got obviously the actual some kind of tone knobs on the bass itself, you got to experiment with that. Some people like rolling the bass way off. Some people like a lot of bass. Some people like a combination of the two. Just, it's something to consider. Obviously, this will change the sound as well as the amp settings. Lots of people have different decisions about that. It all depends on your bass and so on and so forth. Remember that in general on the upright, we're not getting generally a lot of sub lows in there that you might get, especially from a 5-string, from a B string, right? Like unless you got a 5-string upright, but you're not getting a lot of that fundamental. So some people hear it more as like really, really mid-rangey. I don't personally hear it like that. Excuse me, I touched my mic. I don't hear it like that, but a lot of people do. So you'll have to experiment with notching out certain frequencies to find what you like given all these things. But if you've got this set up on the instruments, if you've got the instrument that you want and you've got the pickup setting and the strings high enough and so on and so forth, that's gonna get you a really good start towards getting a good sound in general, right? And so how about some additions to all that stuff that might help us to manipulate the sound a little bit? As I think many of you may know, it is very helpful to have something under the strings at your bridge. So this is, I don't remember where I got it, but it is a very firm foam. It came from foam packing from something that I sort of cut to size. Some people suggest the kind of foam that you get from paintbrush foam brush, but to me that isn't dense enough. So you need to sort of experiment and look for something that is hard enough that it will give the strings resistance from vibrating. You're trying to deaden the overtones. Again, try to shorten the decay by adding something to the bass itself. You can also experiment with just putting a kitchen sponge under there, cut to size. You can put a t-shirt under there, experiment with a bunch of different things, but you will find that it's going to change a lot. So here now is without that mute. Here's my A string and it's still going. And it's still going, and it's still going, and it's still going, and so on. So if I put this back under, here's the A again, and it's gone, with a little bit of weirdness at the end there, I think, because it's only partially under a string. If I put them under all the strings here, it's gone. So it's still a little bit longer than I might like and is a little bit longer than some uprights, but it's a lot shorter, as you can tell. So that's gonna make a really big difference as far as doing that. You can also, of course, have effects. Put something in the signal, the chain between the bass and the amp, or between the amp and whatever you're going to, that can dramatically change the timbre of the sound and try to get more where you wanna be. I don't have experience doing this, but I did see lots of discussion online about digital sort of virtual things that you can do, as well as even going so far back as an Adam Neely video from years and years and years ago, where he talked about using an octave pedal and sort of tapping only one of the options. And so you get this sort of almost organ-like bass, you know, you play the organ plays bass lines with the foot. It gets that kind of sound. So there's lots of things you can do with signal processing. Again, I just want to remind you, to me, it has much more to do with the approach and the concept. And if one is a strong player in the concept, the timbre can be secondary, as long as the feel is right. You can also, of course, add other things or experiment with different things near the bridge or having to do with how long your strings ring. There's something called a thump string mute, which looks interesting, is particularly made for this, is specifically made for this particular idea. I heard at least one person have really bad reviews about it. I can't speak to it. I don't exactly know, but it exists. I'll put the link below. And you could also, according to someone, have a hair tie or some sort of gaff tape right on the saddles, which are these parts of the bridge. Put something here instead of in front of the saddle, put it sort of behind the saddle to try to dampen the overtones. I've not experimented with that myself, but that's another idea that you might use. Besides sort of all the external things that we talked about, changing the bass, changing the strings, changing settings, we can also change technique, not just our left hand, but our right hand technique. And there are a few options that people experiment with, and you may have your preference, or you may want to try some of this in a new way. One thing would be that some folks like to bring their hand way up onto the fingerboard, as I demonstrated earlier. I don't love that. I sometimes use it when I'm trying to get that really warm, undefined sound. Some people will also use their right hand as a mute with the side of their palm. They will rest it on the strings themselves and either play with their fingers or play with the thumb with the hand sort of muted. And you certainly probably know this technique. I don't love that for me personally. It doesn't really work for me. That said, it's fine, it may work for you. Another thing is that we can approach the electric thinking of obstacles like we did with upright, but with the right hand. So we talked about note choices and fingering on the left hand. For the right hand on upright, we're trying to get a lot of the side of our finger, not the full side, but more of the thickness of the finger on the string. And so can we do that on the electric rather than approaching it horizontally, perpendicular, not horizontally, perpendicular? We can try and turn our hand much more so that we can get more of that side of the finger on the string. I'm not used to it. I like it a lot. I'm just not used to it, and it does put your hand in this really awkward position, which physical therapists will hate you for sure. But that might be worth experimenting with. I hope that all this stuff was helpful for you. In summary, remember the general concept of trying to imitate the physical obstacles of the upright is going to be very helpful for you. And I hope that some of these things will perhaps spur some new ideas for you. I've got a PDF below that summarizes these points, and I hope that you'll check it out. And as always, thanks for joining me. And remember, straight ahead and strive for tone.